I had the game, and I had the game because it was one of the... I got a pack of games that came with my Game Boy Color. I was a little bit young for the first Game Boy, but I got the Game Boy Color, the purple thing, and I think it was for my 10th birthday, which would have been in about 99. And Tetris was one of the games that I played. So I knew it from that. It's obviously such a staple and an iconic game in the gaming community, and that was my first introduction to it. My character, Hank, is a Dutch-born American publisher of games who, at the start of the film, was residing in Japan with his family, and he basically discovers the game at a sort of a games fair in Las Vegas, and is immediately able to see its potential. And so he sets about on this kind of mission, really, to secure the rights. And over the course of the story, he learns about the imminent release of Nintendo's Game Boy, has the idea to package the game with Game Boy. So it's this sort of moment, it's this kind of incredible story that sort of happens at this moment of cultural zeitgeist, really, for this game. And Hank is a kind of affable, larger-than-life kind of cowboy figure, really, who kind of goes out on a limb to make his fortune and get the rights to Tetris. He and I spoke, as I said, over Zoom, as is the way that you speak to most people these days in, you know, early 2021, to anyone who's watching in the future. And you're right, there is always an element of responsibility that comes with playing somebody who is a real person. But it is always a story. It is always a story informed by real events. You know, a lot of what happens in the movie is real, but as ever, it's a film. And for the purposes of storytelling and structure and it being entertaining, there is always some liberties taken. But I personally, for my part, I always just feel if you seek to humanize somebody and make them relatable and three-dimensional, then you are doing them the right service, I hope. To anybody who knows anything about acting and theatre, you know, Russia is kind of the mecca for a lot of schools of thought about acting, and any actors that have undergone any training that's based on the work of Stanislavski, you know, it's obviously held in high regard the world over, but nowhere more than Russia. And it really, really shows in the work that those guys churn out. You know, Nikita, who I love, is just such an incredible performer, so kind of alive and available, and has such a great facility of warmth. And I think he, more than anyone, is the heart of the film, really, and has a real kind of quiet dignity to him. And then you have, you know, people like, you know, Oleg, who has this incredible experience and such a rich history of great work, and he's just such an amazing craftsman. It's been such a pleasure to watch him work. And then there's, you know, Igor and Sophia and everybody else all doing wonderful supporting work too. So it's been an amazing experience working with this cast. A couple of great suits, this one being the hero one. And yeah, there's just this sort of, working with Nat, you know, we wanted to kind of bring this element of extroversion out in him to sort of throw him into relief against what is quite an, I would say, austere palette that's being used for Russia in terms of the lighting and the costume and the set design. And it's just to sort of create this sense that Hank is of the other, really, you know, and is kind of westernized and is a stranger and an alien in this land. And then in terms of hair and this thing, and, you know, I'm a little bit rosier than I normally am. That's all largely informed by Hank's actual aesthetic. You know, this is pretty near to how he styled himself at the time, which is great fun because it's so far removed from me, and that's always a great pleasure. And Jan Sewell was amazing in helping me build this look. I think it defines a real moment in the lives of people who are anywhere between, I would guess, kind of, you know, I don't know, 35 and 60, really. You know, I'm sure everyone remembers that happening, and it's probably a lovely way of kind of sharing that moment of somebody's past with their children. And I think I think the reason audiences will enjoy it are probably the same reasons that Matthew Vaughn likes to try and put these things together. It was a sort of colourful, larger than life period of time where people did sort of make themselves look like this and kind of did wear crazy kooky big shoulder, you know, and it's fun. There's something very sort of sensory and extreme about it that makes for great viewing. That's just from an aesthetic perspective, but then you've also got this mad story that's kind of remained fairly hidden for the past 30 years, despite the game being so popular. So it's quite exciting to think that the sort of backstory to this cultural phenomenon will finally get its moment in the sunlight.
Tetris is my main achievement in my life. Well, I dream to become kind of game designer, and as soon as I got the access to the computer, I start to put together the small puzzle games, and Tetris was just one of them, but appears to be very lucky game, and I'm happy that I created it. Well, basically, yes, I was fascinated with all kind of riddles, puzzles, and other mathematical stuff. So I was very interested in mathematics, and that became my job in life. Sometimes I like all these small riddles when you put together the stuff. So base of Tetris was the more or less famous puzzle called pentamina. It's a box with different shapes made out of 5 squares, and you kind of play with them, you put them together somehow, and but when you try to put it back in the box when you are done, it's quite a challenge to do. So so many people spend good hour to put them back together. So I was in love in this puzzle, and I tried to put some kind of computer version of the game together. When I start programming it, the Tetris game came out. Well, when I create the game, any entertainment software didn't exist in my country that time. As a matter of fact, it was no even software market in Soviet Union that time. Most of the computer was mainframe computer controlled by the punch cards. And but in Academy of Science, where I used to work, we have our first personal computers. So the games was quite unusual stuff, and nobody know how to relate to the to this phenomena that I create such a addictive game. So basically, at this point, I decided that I wanted to be published. So I let it go. The only way we distribute software that time was just unauthorized copying. So we give a copy, we copy on the disk and give up the disks, and the disk being copied, and that's like a wooden fire, goes everywhere if the software is good. So that's how Tetris became kind of popular among the people who work on computers. Wasn't too much people that time. We've heard about the desire to make the kind of bio movie about us and about our deal, and I didn't have very big expectation, because, well, it was very exciting moment for myself in this stuff, but it's nothing to do with James Bond or any kind of really serious and kind of deep adventure of the people. I was just kind of boring programmer at computer center. So, well, the event and adventure were really exciting for me, but but for me only. That's what I felt. But when I read the script, it seemed to be an interesting story. Well, basically, we were in love with the games. He showed me he has small TV set with him and Nintendo machine, and he showed me how it works. I never see the video platform before, so I was very excited, and I have several games to show to him, and he was the first competent person I could explain and show my game, my ideas. So we came from different world, but we actually live in one kind of very important reality for us, which is game design.
So my name is Hank Rogers. I am originally the publisher of Tetris in Japan, but I'm more known as the guy who went to the Soviet Union to get the Game Boy rights to Tetris. So Tetris is the most amazing puzzle game ever invented. Of course, what is it to me? It's sort of my business career. I made a business out of it. But Tetris, the interesting thing that's different about Tetris is that in other games in general, there's no randomness. There's no real randomness. But in Tetris, it's really random. So you can't predict what piece is going to come out next. And that you have to make a decision every single time. And a lot of people go through life without making decisions. And so this is a decision game. And that's where, I think that's the pleasure center it hits. Watching Taron Egerton play me in a movie is amazing. I mean, he's, how can I say, so filled with emotion, and he takes all those scenes so seriously. It's sort of like nostalgia for me. Having to convince my wife to do this or that and the other thing, and he's actually doing it. It's amazing. We did a Zoom, before he actually did any of the shooting. So we did get to interact. What can I say? It's strange watching somebody else be me. He does a pretty good job. That's what I can say. He was much more emotionally convincing than I was, I would say. There was no acting involved when I went to Moscow or when I deal with my family, my wife, and there's no acting involved. And yet there's like all these extreme emotions of watching. I watched him do a scene yesterday or day before yesterday. It was fun to watch. First of all, we spoke the same language, even though his English was like really, how can I say, broken at the time. I was pretty good at speaking English as a second language, or speaking to people that spoke English as a second language, having lived in Japan all those years with, dealing with people who barely spoke English. So the answer is you have to use simple, easy words and maybe some gestures or whatever. But we really didn't have problem communicating. We didn't have language per se, but we were able to communicate. It's really hard to communicate what really happened. And in order to get the feeling across of me standing inside the lobby of Electronorg Technica and having the guy tell me, we never licensed the rights to Tetris for console to anyone. And I'm going, holy, I have $2 million worth of cartridges in production in Japan with my in-laws' property as collateral. I mean, all of it, everything that my father-in-law had ever worked for, I had used as collateral for a loan to make those cartridges. So if it turned out that I couldn't publish those games, oh my God, that would have been a disaster. But hey, I made it through all of that. Got the Game Boy rights, and a month later I was back to get the console rights, solidify my position in Japan. Alexei Pajitnov is the original creator of Tetris. Sometimes people call me Mr. Tetris, but actually he is Mr. Tetris. I would say if I'm anything, I'm Dr. Tetris because I kept Tetris alive all these years. But he created the game. He was a mathematician and a puzzle aficionado, if you want to pick a word. And so he's been creating puzzles all his life, and Tetris is just one of those puzzles. And he's salt of the earth, nice guy.
In that time in Moscow, we had lockdown. So I got proposal from my agent and record a self-tape. Got feedback from director John and producer that they like me, and then we went to the next level. They called it chemistry room. I've never done it before. It's very interesting. Through Zoom, we read with Taran all my scenes, and John, we were rehearsing, searching. Yeah, so it's really interesting. I mean, it's weird, but play through Zoom. I would say that the main idea is like follow your dream and be brave, reaching your purposes and dreams. And my character is a just great example of it. Her story, she's dreaming to become a hero, and in the end she makes such a hard decision that put her world upside down. This is the film about two great talents from different cultures. So one talent is a genius programmer, Alexei Pajitnov, another is genius businessman, Hank Rogers, and how they're collaborating, even though they're from really different worlds, but they're collaborating, and Tetris appeared worldwide. I had in my childhood Tetris, and I think all children in Russia had Tetris. So I just liked it, and I would say that it's kind of like meditation when you're playing Tetris, because you're calming yourself down, and Tetris has connection with this, I don't know, desire that all human beings have to create something, to build something, you know, to put everything in order. So it's kind of, that's why it's a hit, I think, the Tetris. John. He's so supportive, so kind. I would say he's a captain of the ship, and he cares a lot of the team. He makes a great atmosphere on the set. And I really like how he feels the scenes, his intuition, what feedback he gave after scenes, nuances, details. So yeah, it's really interesting to work with John. Taran, such an amazing artist. Oh my God, he has such a strong energy. Wow. And it's interesting to observe how he's acting. He's very, very focused and concentrated on the scene, on the character, on the process. So very focused. Russian actors are my favorite. I mean, we became friends. We spent so many times together, so much time together. Igor, the Valentins. I worked with him before in Russian film, so I think he's absolutely genius. He has such an interesting charisma, such an interesting nature.
I think if it hadn't been for Hank Rogers' tenacity, we wouldn't have probably seen Tetris to the scale that we're doing now, you know. I think that his tenacity and Alexei's reluctance at the beginning, because Alexei was very reluctant to engage with him because he was suspicious of who this guy was, you know. But I think his tenacity and his sort of what makes Hank Rogers is why we have this. Obviously, you would never have the game without Alexei's brilliant sort of invention, but his persistence in trying to sort of convince Alexei that he was the right guy to partner up with, and their resultant friendship, which lasts to this very day, is why we still have Tetris and why it's so popular and why the game has been so successful. But I think it was that the only reason that happened was because of their friendship and how it's carried on through to the modern day. Yeah, one of the big challenges when you're doing a true story is to take the script and to go, if it's based on real events or real people, say, how are we going to make this different from a documentary? How's it going to be entertaining? We're going to stay as true as possible to the story, but make it entertaining for an audience. And I think that's always the big challenge, how to entertain but still make it believable and true to the actual, to the real people's story. I think the sort of computer graphic element was hinted at in the script, but it didn't get fully realized until post-production. We were under so much pressure to shoot this because it was during COVID, that we really just concentrated on the narrative, right, and telling that story and telling the thriller aspect of the story. And I think a lot of the sort of computer graphic style transitions or little chapters and stuff came afterwards, when we could really sort of sit down with VFX and start to sort of visualize that, and incorporate characters and different ideas. And there was a lot of different people putting in those ideas. But I think that came after. It came more in post rather than being conscious of that during the shoot. I was very conscious of just not relying on that, but being able to tell the tale and not having to fall back on those kind of more gimmicky sort of computer elements. Yeah, but I think we've got the nice balance between the two. Yeah. So the music, we always had the idea of playing, some banging sort of 80s tracks in there. So we've got, Final Countdown by Europe. That was part of that's part of a scene, and that was a lot of fun to shoot. Yeah. Yeah, that was a great scene, and we loved doing that. And then we've got a few tracks that have been recorded that are well-known tracks, like Blondie's Heart of Glass. That was we've got a Russian version of that, because it was, and we wanted to really sort of play on the minor key for that, to when Hank arrives in Russia, so it feels as though there's a big threat, and then the lyric would be in Russia as well. So just we were thinking about that. And then we've got a version. I've got a Japanese version of Bonnie Tyler's "Holding Out for a Hero." That we use in the car chase near the end as well. So, there was some of those ideas came before, some of them came in post. It's just an organic process when you're making a movie. You kind of have to get your mainstay. You've got to shoot your main part of the film and concentrate on that, and then with the music, we had a great composer called Lorne Balfe, who did a really interesting sort of 80s synth track, 80s synth score, but also used a lot of the actual Tetris theme as the basis for the score, but not in a very obvious way. And the first time you actually hear what people recognize as the Tetris theme, which is a Russian folk song called Korobineki, that is what the Tetris theme is actually made of. The only time you hear it in full is at the end of the film, during the chase, when Valentine's trying to chase Hank onto the plane. It was like a Hansel and Gretel trail that we seeded throughout the score from the beginning, and then we sort of paid off. So it was almost like I kind of recognized that, and then okay, it delivered. We wanted to put in more of a thriller sort of chase at the end, to pay off. So we worked a lot in the end with Noah, and bits and pieces throughout there. And myself and Noah sort of worked very closely together for, it was almost a year before we went into production, because we're always getting held up with COVID and with financing, and the script wasn't quite right for the financiers to sign off on. So we worked really. We had a very close. We had a great close working relationship. I hope people have a fun ride, with this film. I hope they're kind of educated in the history of it. Obviously, I hope they enjoy the thriller aspect of it, with the KGB and with Robert Maxwell. I hope they see the humour in it, because there are some great funny moments, particularly with Toby Jones, who is one of the funniest actors I've ever worked with. He's got a great part there, and Robert Stein, and with Anthony Boyle, who plays Kevin Maxwell. They've got a really great little duo going on there. That's probably where a lot of the comedy comes from. But it is heart. It's a story about family, and it's about friendship, and I think more so than anything else about being about a game or being about a time in history. That's really what the film is about. So I hope people have an uplifting feeling at the end, because it is an uplifting film, and it's a success story between these two very unlikely characters.
It was a game, and I suppose I remember the old-fashioned, the fact that it is black and white, and it was played on a Game Boy. I definitely remember that. But of course, it is completely different now, you know, and they're sort of paying it on, you know, smartphones. I certainly didn't know the story. I absolutely didn't know that it was invented by some, you know, by a Russian person. I didn't know the whole connection with Robert Maxwell and Sega and all that. So reading the script, I thought was fascinating. A, for that knowledge, and also it's like a fast thriller. Well, it is a fast thriller, and you just, you know, fascinating. Yeah. There were quite a few images that had been pulled together by researchers for the film, but I definitely went off and researched the characters because they're real, you know, and, you know, I never think that you should be doing a looky-likey, but I do think you try and get the essence of somebody. And then it depends on the director, and then it depends on the actor themselves, how far they want to go. I mean, in Taran's case, Henk Rogers, I believe he's part Indonesian, so he's got a much darker skin tone and much darker curly hair, and I had to make that look on Taran be more believable, so everything was pulled back a bit. But I think also the fact that it's set in the 80s, which, you know, there's all big hair in the 80s, you know, that it's we knew we had to push it a little way, but I don't think it would have looked right if we tried to make Taran very dark-skinned, and not necessary, I don't think. I've worked with Mark Coulier so many times, and I love the way he works. I like the collaboration with him. I like the fact that you know, we would talk about the hair and the makeup together, and, you know, we would accommodate each other, and, you know, we would, you know, I would say to him, I think that hair works, and he would say, I think that nose works, or should we go for the second nose? Or, you know, I love that collaboration, that it's not just two people doing two separate things. And so it made sense for me, you know, to make sure Mark was on board the project. And also John had worked with Mark, so he was 100% up for him coming on board. And it was great, and it was again the same thing. You know, we knew we had to get Roger scanned. We knew there was a fat suit involved. We did tests on that. We tried different size suits on him. Obviously, then you work very closely with Nat, the costume designer, which I would anyway. You know, with all our characters, you know, it's a whole creative design that works when you all come together. I suppose the prosthetic ones are rewarding because you are completely changing somebody. I suppose Gorbachev is also quite interesting because Matthew came to us quite late, so we didn't have the time to do the full makeup that we did on Roger. So that one's quite interesting because it's smaller pieces, and I've always liked that as well. I like the fact that you can change somebody just by doing very small things, like he's got little cheek pieces on and a nose, and then obviously we shave the top of his head and then put on hair around the side. So I suppose that's rewarding because we had to pull it together very quickly. But I do think it is amazing to watch Roger as Maxwell, you know, the voice, everything. The other thing about this film is John was very keen to make sure that, you know, if we had Russian characters, that actually they were played by Russian actors. That made it a little bit difficult because obviously availability, getting them in, the COVID, the visas and all that. So we did get our actors quite late. Nikita, who plays Alexei, we had quite a funny WhatsApp thing going on where I had him taking his own head shape for me because I knew I had to get him a wig because I knew his own hair wasn't long enough. So that was quite entertaining as he was showing me pictures on his WhatsApp of how it was going along. So he was brilliant. And in fact, all the Russian actors are amazing. I mean, their English is so good, but, you know, they brought, I think, another element to this film. Alwyn, who's just fantastic, the DOP, he told us quite early on that he had different coloured palettes from the point of view of lighting, and that makes a huge difference to me. And I knew that he was going to desaturate the Russian, so any colours were diffused. I was a bit worried about wig colours and skin tones to begin with, but actually it's fine. I do pump up especially Taran's colour, because he's, you know, we wanted him to have a little bit more of a tanned look. So I do have to do more on him when we're shooting the Russian bit, because it is more diffused. But then, you know, we've got the Las Vegas bit, which is really bright and crisp, and, you know, so it is nice to know these things. And it's also quite interesting when you're watching on set, when you look at the, you know, the properly set up monitors, how it all looks. And in fact, of course, that also affected the prosthetic makeup, which of course I had to pass on to Mark. And we did do a little test of, you know, how much colour it did diffuse from their faces.
If you were going to do this film, what would you do? What would be the first thing that you did? And I said, I'd have a scout out from tomorrow night looking for the right architecture, the right locations. He said, okay, can you come down and meet everybody? And so I sent the scout out, and I got in the car and drove to London. And by the following week, we realised that we had actually quite a fantastic bunch of options for locations of Moscow and London. So it was incredible. I think 1980s is such a fond memory for those that are middle-aged. It's also very trendy right now. It's becoming trendier, and I watch the youngsters on the set, the trainees and the younger members of the departments, kind of look longingly at some of the costumes that are appearing on the set. They want to wear them, so I think we've tuned into a really interesting time. The hairstyles are trendy these days as well. The music's hip, and also computer games. You know, teenagers know what Tetris is. Some adults don't. From the beginning, everybody has reached out to try and find those that are willing to participate. And generally they've been incredibly helpful, and speaking to Alexei himself, he's an absolute sweetheart. And you can imagine the kind of level of detail that he enjoys, and he's loved reading the script. We're hoping that he makes it over at some point for a visit. Similarly, Henk has just been adorable. He's even helped Taran with the details on his personality, his wardrobe, his taste. His motivation, his personality, and he's in touch regularly. Tetris is a really fast moving fight to the death for the rights for something that everybody knows is going to just explode internationally. It's incredibly exciting, and I guess audiences these days are very familiar with how addicted people can become to video games. This is the one that started all of that, and so exciting. Scotland has been wonderful to us, providing all this really atrocious weather, and we're very grateful for that. And thankfully it's fitting because it matches Moscow. And on top of that, all the film community here have a wonderful relationship with Screen Scotland. Screen Scotland is now run by Isabel Davis, who used to be head of international at the British Film Institute. She studied in Scotland, and her presence here has made a dramatic difference to the industry. We have our first independent studio now up and running in Edinburgh, and Scottish Government have bent over backwards to help us find locations, to accommodate the crew, find and identify cast and crew, and whenever we run into any bureaucratic problems, they're the first to help. So right now, I'm happy to say that Scotland is full in terms of those that want to come and film here, and it's for a very good reason. It's because the infrastructure is so amazing. I have been working with John Baird on and off for a few years now. We have been developing a script together, and we've done lots of research and location work on that, casting. But I hadn't seen him in action until we started working on Tetris together. and I've found him really delightful, and somebody should bottle the energy that he has. It's relentless. It's amazing. He's really determined in a good way. He's incredibly decisive, which I love in directors. Just makes a decision and moves on. And also, I'm never scared to give him bad news, because sometimes you got to give bad news on a very regular basis to directors, and some of them can handle it, some of them can't. John takes it all in his stride. He genuinely is interested in people, their motivation, their psychology, and I think that makes actors warm to him. He has a control of the set that I rarely experience, and on top of that, he's meticulous. He does his homework and never drops a ball. Toby Jones is a delight, and he's such a professional. And he's been on set maybe for 4 or 5 days with us now, and the mood is completely different when he's there, because everybody just shows him so much respect. He's really wonderful. He's so talented. Just watching him is a masterclass in acting. Sophia coming into this country, stranger in a strange land, and obviously, this is terrifying for her. It'd be terrifying for anyone, but she's taken to it like a duck to water, and she's got that lovely combination of being that gorgeous fragility, and then really empowered. So she appears that she might be weak, and then she just turns into this pillar of strength. So she's doing a fantastic job, and we've really put her through her paces. But she's delighting everybody. Matthew is a very clever man, and he's obviously very successful in the business, and he's a very strong marketing mind. And he has a very clear idea of what is going on directorially, because he's done it so often as well. And I haven't worked with another producer before who's got so much directing experience, so it's really interesting to get his perspective and that level of experience and applying it to this. Matthew's not on set, I'm on set, but he's looking at the material all day long, and he regularly has ideas, and when he does, we put them to John and we implement them, and he's a great sounding board whenever we have any issues. There's no doubt he'll have already dealt with a similar situation at some point, so he's fab to have there when we need him.
I grew up around Tetris. My father discovered the game in the late 1980s, and he was responsible for bringing Tetris into the rest of the world, through the Game Boy. So it's always been a part of me, and it's just been such an amazing experience. It's been such an amazing experience to grow up with this game, just because it's something that everybody's known. We've loved it, played it to pieces when we were growing up, and it's still relevant today. And so, yeah, Tetris is, it's beyond a game. It's really a lifestyle, and I'm trying to take that into the next generation of gamers and people. I've been involved from the very beginning of the movie making. I was actually the one that kind of got connected to the director initially, and we started off the project really from like finding the writers to writing the script, and seeing it into full production today. So I would say, like, between Hank, Alexi, and I mean, we've been involved from the very beginning of the production. My involvement has been, working with the producers and working with the writer to make sure that the script is written the correct way, to make sure that the story's being written in the right way, giving references like pictures from our old house growing up and our siblings, and just talking about how my parents were growing up, how we were as a family. So really, I think we had a lot to do with like kind of the creative part of it, of making the whole script come to life. The movie takes place in like kind of a transformative place in our lives, where we go from like living in this 2-bedroom apartment, only speaking Japanese and supporting this crazy foreigner father, into more of a successful story down the line, to where we're still running the business and I'm running the company. And so I think you'll get to see some of how I was as a child, with the relationship that I've had with my father. And, it still exists to this day. So it's really exciting to see.
I was sent the script and just fell in love with it. Thought it was so fun and fast-paced and just thought it was amazing. And I went on tape and I had a mullet at the time. So I was doing a different project and I looked a bit feral. And John rang me, the director, and said, can you do the same tape, exactly the exact same, but can you cut your hair and just sort of scrub up a bit? So I did that and wore a suit, and then he asked me to do it, yeah. Well, I think there's this classic thing of, wanting to impress your father, but also, wanting to destroy him. I don't know if it's sort of Oedipus complex or whatever, but it's this constant thing of there's scenes where I feel like he's becoming his father and he's berating Stein. I sometimes wonder if he's doing that because he's slowly becoming his father, or if he's doing that to impress his father. John texted me a photo of Roger in the full prosthetics, and I just thought he was sending me a photo of Robert Maxwell. So I sort of looked at it and went, that's a weird text. I don't know why he sent me that, and I looked again, and then he wrote, your dad, and I was like, oh my God, that's... The makeup people have done such an incredible job. And then it was last week when he showed up on set for the first time in the full suit and the makeup, and it was just... There's no acting required for me, really, and I just sort of have to look at him, and it's all there. And he's incredible. Really generous actor, and he's just a pro. He's just so good, and he's been great to work with. Working with Taron's been amazing. He's incredible. I mean, the guy's just a star. He's really just he's a great leader and a great sort of captain of the ship, and he's a great actor. And Toby Jones is a legend. Working with John's been amazing. He's just an incredible director. He's got a sort of, he'll probably hate me for saying this, but he's got like childlike wonderment or something, like where he just wants to try everything, and he just feels so excited to be on set, and it makes you feel excited, and he allows you to feel very comfortable very quickly, and very invested in your choices, and is very sort of actor-led. He lets you sort of just feel out a scene, and he'll just sort of pick up. He's brilliant. I really enjoy working with John. One word when I was meeting with the costume designer was privilege, and I just wanted everything to sort of exude privilege, and the hair to be sort of quite perfectly coiffed. I wanted him to sort of get up in the morning and really have a good long hard look at himself, and make sure he was, tip top, best shirts, best suits, all a power statement, the watch, rings.
That first part, that first like 6 weeks where you're formulating your plan, is the same wherever you may be shooting it, I think. And then certainly once I'd kind of presented those ideas to John, and John was kind of on the same belief that we thought we were going to go for a kind of very desaturated, washed out, largely blue palette for our Russia stuff. It would be far more primary for our American stuff, and then we would go with more pastels for our Japanese stuff. Once we'd kind of all settled on that way forward, then you started to knit how we were going to try and make the locations work. Whether it was going to be in Glasgow. We did look to be in London and Budapest, and before then it was going to be in Berlin. So we'd got our kind of our MO for the film, and then we just had to try and marry them with the spaces that we were able to find, or not, and in which case then we would have to build. John and I were on board together with what I wanted to do with the film from the start, and he was very much kind of, I mean, when you read the film, it talks about, Henk saying that when he was first over or maybe that was the documentary that I watched. Yes, it was the documentary I watched about Henk when he was over in Russia. He said they'd literally switched the colour off. It just became all grey. So you have an immediate starting point from the documentary and the research and the script. I mean, it kind of designs itself, really. You don't really have to force it in one direction because it just kind of sits very nicely together. And so very quickly, John and I were on the same page in terms of where we wanted to take it. And then Alvin kind of came in quite late because he was only on the project. With maybe 6 to 7 weeks left, and we'd already developed kind of a way forward with both John and with Nat. And in fact, Nat phoned me and we talked about what we were doing, and we'd already we kind of come into line quite quickly because it's the script kind of commands you to do that. Really, you can't push it in one way because it just won't go that way. When Alvin came in, we talked about whether or not the desaturation was going to be done in camera or that he was going to take it out in post. So we did a few camera tests and worked out that, you know, there were some reds actually that wouldn't work. So we had to be quite careful with our Soviet flag regs, because when he desaturated it, they would go a bit brown. So we had to make sure that there were some colours that we went slightly brighter, knowing that we were going to turn them down in post. And there were some things that kind of behaved more or less as you would imagine if the colour was taken out. So we used a lot of blues, a lot of greys. The oranges became a bit more pastel-y. We tried to steer clear, certainly for our exterior Russian stuff, of any warm tones. So there weren't really any yellows. Aside from our Soviet flags, there weren't kind of reds or oranges. And we just tried to cool it down all the time for that. And Nat was kind of reflected that with his costume design too. Kremlin was going to go really white, as per all of the reference. And it was lots of gold and red carpet. Valentin, we were going to go with a bit more wood finished, and it was going to be blue carpet. And then Elog was going to be a lot more earthy because they were the bottom of the pile. So we looked at the Glasgow City Chambers, we looked at Edinburgh City Chambers, and there was another location that we were looking at for our interior Kremlin, but nothing quite hit the kind of the opulence level that we wanted for the Kremlin, although Gorbachev isn't quite like that. And then when we found the Signet Library, it was just perfect because it was absolutely stunning, over the top, very opulent. And if you think about you haven't seen the other spaces, but we've got this huge disparity in the kind of level of opulence through the film. We've got kind of where Alexei gets thrown, which is kind of, he's guarded by the KGB in this squalor, and then we've got the Kremlin. It's a huge spread. Well, Elog was a funny one because Elog, we knew what it looked like in reality, and it was a very kind of neoclassical mansion that was on the outskirts of Moscow, but didn't really feel that really worked with the spectrum of buildings and architecture that we had through the film. And we'd already hit neoclassical a couple of times with our Kremlin and with our Valentin's office, so we wanted to go something slightly different with that. So we made that 60s, a more 60s build, which matches to the zoology building up here in Aberdeen. Which, funny enough, when John said to me, I think we're going to be shooting in Scotland, have you seen any brutalist buildings in Scotland? The building that we're shooting in today, the building that was Elog, is the first building that I sent him a photograph of. So it's nice that it's done a complete circle. And actually, it's the building that John went to university in. We've managed to find a DVK-3, which is a model of an Electronica 80, which is the computer that Alexei coded Tetris on originally, that we got shipped out of Moscow, although it got held up at customs for about 2 weeks. Got shipped over. We then 3D printed it, 3D scanned it, 3D printed it, and then made 8. So in the Moscow Computer Science Center, he's coding on a kind of our version of a DVK-3, which is the Electronica 80, which is the one that he really coded on. So that's quite nice to make sure that we've done our right level of homework, and we've got a real computer out of Moscow that we've scanned and rebuilt or made versions of. We've almost definitely got an angle that way all the time, but obviously, undoubtedly, there's going to be two people having a conversation, and you're going to need the reverse. And we have often had to kind of either cheat the reverse or shoot it a lot lensier, so we're softer behind, or we've had to frame it in a way that we're, up underneath the eye line, so we're into sky. So we have struggled, obviously, often finding the reverse, or we're only able to bring them in from there to that, rather than a nice kind of sweeping move to reveal something. And I'm sure there's going to be loads of CG, but certainly any kind of developing shot where we'll kind of lift off from them to reveal a wider environment, there's going to be that to replace, that to replace, that to replace, that to replace. But that would be the same, I think, even if we were to do it in Russia now, because we're not in 1988. I think it is about companionship and friendship, and that these two kindred spirits on opposite side of the ocean, capitalist and communist, have kind of come together to have this mutual love of video gaming and creating something that brings so much joy to the entire country.
I was pleasantly surprised because it's very interesting and strong script, and it's always like, wow. And all characters are still alive, and it's amazing. Belikov, my character, this is a guy who is in charge of all this trade between USSR and the rest of the world, and obviously he doesn't know anything about this game as well. And so when he got first offer to sell this game, obviously he sold it, making some profit for this country, because he's one of a few who believes in ideas of communism, to live equal, to do the maximum, and to be happy. So he protect his country from being robbed. So, and that's why he has these wonderful scenes with capitalists protecting Russian game called Tetris. I left country in 1991 and come back to 2002, 2003, because people had no money, no food, no future. Nobody knew what's going to be tomorrow, because this situation. And it was horrible time. Me as an actor, theaters were closed. People didn't go to the theaters because it was dangerous. No salary, no movies. It was horrible. Really. We have a very professional crew. We have amazing cast. We have talented director, and we have, as I said, very strong and interesting script. What else does the actor need to be happy? He is open. I like to work with him. It's like a teamwork. He gives you freedom. He gives you suggestion. He gives you right direction if he won't correct you, but he gives you freedom to act, to trust you. That's very important, And I just enjoyed the work with him. Last 5 days, the 5th day, we shoot all scenes in my office, and it's so well written. So all scenes for me, it's like one flow, and just enjoy all this process. For me, just not like this scene or that scene, because we have such a great cast. Working with Roger Allam or Toby Jones, they are great theatrical actors. And today I work with, will work with Anthony Bowl. So I just have a nice time to work with them. So interior, everything's superb. It looks like real Russia. There's no, they don't know. No, it's beautiful. And John is so picky. She comes and asks, "Is it right Russian letters? Is it has sense? Yeah, I okay. This is it." No. It's well designed. Everything is so real. No. I have no doubts.
I downloaded the Tetris in here in Glasgow, and I'm on top list number 4 in Glasgow. For 1 week, I were top 4 because I was playing all my free time for about like 4 days, and then I go, no, stop. I have to prepare my role. It was very familiar to me because when I entered the Alexis' house here on the stage, it was like, wow, it was like time traveling. And for me, it was awesome because some little, I don't know how they noticed it, some little things everywhere, and the whole atmosphere of it, I liked it. It felt like home, actually, because I remember my home when I was like 4 years old maybe, and there were some things that I found on the stage. I even found a book about the theater and the Russian book about the theater, and I found my grandfather on it, and it was so funny. Really, I don't know how. It's interesting. Lucky for us, we have a dialogue with we have a meeting, internet meeting with Alexei, the real one, and he's actually a very good person, very open. He was ready to teach us how it is to be him, and he told me the main thing that I didn't even see, that Hank was the first man. How to say, to whom you can talk about, to whom you can talk about computers, because he was like an, I don't know, dinosaur, and in Russia he was the first one, the only one, and he can even have like a dialogue about it, and that's what the point for me, because why they're friends. Alexei is a guy who wants to play, he loves it, and also that he was like a dinosaur in there. He was like alone, without no business around him because of the Soviet Union, and he even didn't get any royalties for about 5 years or 6 years or 7 years. Yes, it was awful. While Tetris is around the world. Taran he's a top professional for me. I just, everything I have to do with Taran is be responsible for my part and then absorb experience. And that's it. Because every little moment, everything, he's very polite on the stage. I think he's brilliant, and that's it. I think everybody knows it. He's brilliant, really. He saw in us that we're representing Russia. We know what's going on in there, and of course, I even like had a task for my mom, because she remembers that time, and we like have a scene with one monologue, and I called her, and she said no. It wasn't like this, and surprisingly for me, John, he just changed the scene. This phrase "falling blocks" is saying everything to me, actually, because there's a lot of blocks between I don't know, me and my friends, everybody, between everybody. There's lots of psychological blocks, I don't know, ego blocks, everything. Even in myself, I've got to fight to love myself, and it's about it. I think it's easy to say it's about love, but no, I think it's about the blocks that are falling.
Yes, he is. He's got, sort of age-wise, he's similar, and the sort of general character of his face is quite similar. We knew we'd be able to enhance it, because Maxwell has these kind of nice folds under here, and, just looking at pictures of Maxwell next to Roger, we knew we had to change his forehead and cover his eyebrows, and Maxwell's got those huge black bushy eyebrows, so those are all hair inserted one at a time to create Maxwell's eyebrows. So we knew we'd be doing that, and then it was a case of how much we wanted to transform him into Maxwell or how much we wanted to keep Roger, so we that's always the case, really, finding the balancing act, really. Initially we take a live cast, and then we get the actor in and we do a photo session with them, and then usually I have a play around in Photoshop, transposing one, you can even take a picture of Maxwell and cut and paste and paint over it and give myself an idea of what it's going to look like, and then we just start the sculpture, really. I had a sculptor called Josh Weston, who's been doing a lot of stuff, working with me over the last 5 or 6 years, and longer even. And he started sculpting on the plaster cast of Roger's head. And then between that, really, we just go to and fro and make suggestions and tweak it around until we get the character. It's becoming a part of it more and more, technology. In this instance, we have a scanner, a facial scanner in the workshop that I've just purchased. So we're able to take a 3D scan of the actor's face now and then 3D print it. What we found this time, when we take a live cast, it's a material, a rubber material that's pasted over someone's face and backed up with plaster bandage. And what we found, the weight of the material can distort the shapes a little bit. It distorts the bottom lip, and we found that it distorted this a little bit, and the cheeks. So we 3D printed that and placed it into the live cast of Roger before we did the master mold in order to start the sculpting process, just so that we had the correct expression. So more and more we're using that kind of technology. Once the skin texture, at the moment it doesn't scan skin texture as well as taking a life cast. So, but it's not far off now, and it will get better and better. And I think once the skin texture is as good, when it captures all the skin pores and texture as well as a life casting material, then we won't be life casting anymore. We'll just be scanning actors. The basic process is you take your head cast of the actor, you have a plaster cast, and then you sculpt in oil-based clay, or we do. We sculpt the whole makeup in an oil-based clay. Once we've got the character, we then submerge the whole sculpture underwater, and we have a separating material from the plaster to the oil-based clay or wax-based clay, and then we can lift off various parts of the sculpture. So you'll cut through the sculpture, take the forehead piece off, you'll blend away the cheek edge, and then you'll make a separate mold of that particular area to make your core, and then you place the forehead piece back on, and that way you separate out the forehead. And you do the same with the nose and with the face piece. You take it off and you make the cores separately. So you work in reverse, into the reverse way you're going to stick it on. So if you're going to apply the forehead last, that will be the first piece that comes off. Then the nose will come off, and then the face will come off. And then we mold each of those pieces separately. The mold is open, the clay is cleaned out, leaving the space in between. We spray a plastic barrier on both sides of the mold, place the mold back together again, and inject silicone into it. And once the silicone is set, it almost creates like a bag with a dissolvable plastic edge. And that's how we get our final appliances. They're made out of silicone out of a mold. So it's quite a long process. Probably 6 weeks to create this makeup from start to finish. It's, the face. What is it about Maxwell? And Maxwell has a flat chin. So we filled this out in Roger, and he's got thin lips. And, we've kept some of Roger in there. We didn't want to cover him up completely. It's usually, you can try too hard to achieve your character and then you lose your actor. And it's a fine balance between one and the other. He's pretty much covered Roger, but the appliances are quite fine and thin. There's not much material on this neck bit. We've just widened his jaw. We've widened his chin because Maxwell's got quite a strong chin. And it's really just picking out all those anatomical things and using our knowledge of anatomy to make sure that when our Maxwell face moves, it doesn't move in a strange way. You can't change where the nasolabial fold lines are, for example. If you put them here, in this smile, it's going to buckle weirdly on the actual actor's thing. So you do have to conform to the actor's facial structure. Jan was making the wig, and it's like, where are we going to end the wig? Are we going to keep Roger's hair at the back and colour that? So that's what Jan's doing at the moment. Her and her team, they'll colour Roger's hair at the back, and the wig ends just below his crown, and then he's got a full lace front. You've got several options with the way the hair and the actor's hair and the wig are gonna combine. So we just have some discussions and work it out between us with how our prosthetics are going to work and technically how the hair is going to work. Do you keep Roger's sideburns or do you cover them up and create the whole thing in a wig? And in this instance, it was better to create the whole temple hairline and wig and everything, so he's completely covered, but keep the back of his hair, so you keep all this stuff at the nape of the neck. The game Tetris, as soon as John mentioned it, I'm doing this, I had a quick look on Wikipedia, said he was doing this film about Tetris and the wrangling about the rights to it, so I read up on Wikipedia, and it's really interesting. But yes, I had, in my flat at the time, myself and my two friends, I was at art college, I think, and we got the first Game Boy, and we were obsessed with Tetris because it came preloaded on the Game Boy, which is what this story is partly about. It's huge. It's enormous worldwide, So you reading the script, you do get a sense of how much money there was at stake and why these people are all trying to scrabble for the various rights. And I think it was before all this stuff was locked in stone, and contracts were much tighter these days because everybody's aware of which rights go to what country. But back then, I think it was probably unusual to have different platforms. You didn't think about the different platforms for the different rights that were, which I didn't know, which is the really interesting part of the whole story, really.
Basically, Gregor, the other producer, called me up, said it's an interesting movie. I want to pitch to you called Tetris. I sort of thought, I knew the game, I didn't know the story. Read the script and thought it was fantastic. And I thought it was a really great story about a very an unknown story about a very well-known game, and that got me excited. So and it was a brand, and I felt it was a movie that people would enjoy and be interested in. Well, Taron is a good friend of mine. Obviously, we've now made, I should know how many movies we made, maybe 5 together, and I thought of Taron when I read it, because these are characters that have traits which are slightly questionable for likability, but he can take that and sometimes do pretty outrageous things, but you still like him, and that's for me that's the definition of a movie star as well, which I think he has become one, and he plays the role as I couldn't imagine anybody else playing the role as well as he does. One of the reasons why I brought this to Apple was, Apple and Tetris and the birth of Apple and the Tetris and Game Boy and Steve Jobs, Hank, these were visionaries that, they broke the rules to make the world better. Not enough people are doing that any at the moment. I think everyone's become too conservative and thinking in the box, and break rules to make the world better is a great thing to do. Hank broke a lot of rules. I think the fact that it was made in Russia, and I remember I grew up in the Cold War, and we all had images of what Russia was. So it's a sort of, originally the script had 2 pages of explaining the backdrop of Russia being the enemy of the West, and now by the time we finished the movie, we were like, well, we can cut that out. But I think what I found most interesting was an American going behind the Iron Curtain and to a game that was obviously Russian, but I never assumed Tetris was made in Russia. I just felt it was just an American invention for a game, and the backdrop was just chosen as a marketing tool. And I think, when the villain was the Maxwell family. Robert Maxwell is a fascinating character as well, and the great line that sometimes, truth is greater than fiction. I've now got used to making movies about people that are not only real but are alive, and it's a bit of a tricky relationship at the beginning, because sometimes there's decisions that need to be made to make the movie better, and trying to explain that to someone when they've got memories of what it was really like, and you think, well, we can't compress your whole life story into 2 hours without cutting stuff out and or combining moments. What astonished me when I met Hank and Alexei is they really are those characters. I found it quite funny that the first meeting, Alexei was very pedantic and I'm not sure about this, and then Hank was like, I want Tom Cruise to play me, and was all over the fast and energetic, and Alexei very just particular about everything, and so I was impressed that the script had actually really, and now the actors as well, they really captured what the real people were like. I've always been a producer, and I think it's important for my sake and the people I work with, just to remind us that movies can be made for smaller budgets, and I like to break talent. So a lot of the crew that we put onto Tetris, Tetris was a big movie for them. These smaller films I do for a training ground and to give me muscle memory of that. It's important that, at the end of the day, making a movie is a camera, script, actors, and when you get into the big budget stuff, you tend to forget that. It's probably easier for me to be involved in a movie set in the 80s, because it was the time where culture and I was absorbing it. So I obviously love 80s music, fashion, film, probably because I was 13 and this was fresh, new, and exciting. So recreating that feeling wasn't hard for me, or to, John's the same age, so John can talk about this more than I can. But that's why sort of mandated we had to have electronic music, had to use music from the time. The clothing, you know, I could look at it and go, no, that's a cliche, you know, because the problem is there was the reality and then there's the cliche of what people think the 80s were. So we were trying to keep it into the, you know, because I was there, I could say that looks stupid or not. And trying to think, there was a, you know, something about the 80s is it was a time where sort of, again, the 80s to now is a very similar time where, you know, where basically the world was a pretty tough place to be living in, and so art and fun was, you know, everything got, you know, music, films, fashion exploded as a reaction, you know, reaction to the dour times we're in. So I think, you know, hopefully this will inspire kids to see what it was like and go off and you know, say break some rules, make something different, and you know, this decade I hope will be a decade that stands for, because if you think of the last 20-25 years, there's been nothing original. So whether it's in music, film, fashion, it's all rehashing what people have done before. So I'm hopefully now this will be the beginning of a new era.
I'm Igor, and I am the KGB in the movie. I'm Valentin, who's head of foreign trade department, Communist Party, and well, I'm one of the main antagonists, some kind of I don't know, manipulator, and well, Terrence's character is my and well, I am pain in his. I think so. John, director of the film, just a great director, and well, he gave me the just amazing opportunity to choose between roles. He said to me, well, Belikov and Valentin, well, I can't choose for you, because, well, well, for me, it was no choice. Sure, the evil guy. I don't think of him as a villain, in that sense, because well, he's one of the smartest guys in the movie. I think he's not so dedicated to the dying society as the guy named Belikov. Well, he sees things right, and he knows that how it end. And well, as I said, he just wants his own piece of cake and to leave them alone, to make some money and to live happily ever after. I'm from St. Petersburg, and well, there is some similarities between Edinburgh and Glasgow, in those small streets, architecture stuff, you know. So I feel like home. The first day was my first day of the shooting. They were shooting my main scene, and it was from it was 6 or 7 a.m. and well, my first time in Scotland, my first time shooting movie, and well, they began from my main monologue. Main scene when Valentin talks about his childhood and etc. I think I think to begin is always the most challenging stuff in every project, in cinema, on stage, in theater. So to begin, just to start. Tetris is for everyone, because it's not only about the game, and mainly not about the game, but about real people, about history, about people's intentions, about people's choices. What choices do they make, and well, people building their lives and working for their futures, and so about relationships and finding, a common soul. How to say? Well, it's about life.
There's a lot available online that makes our researches much easier than before. You can hear him speak, you can see him move, things like that. That's very useful. There are books, but I was very aware and actually rather relieved that it's not a film about Robert Maxwell, because getting the makeup on is 4 hours, and I think I might be dead if it was a film about Robert Maxwell. So, he has a specific function in this film, and so it releases you from having to explore absolutely everything about his life, fascinating though his life is. I mean, he escaped from Czechoslovakia in 1940, I think, when he was 16, and made his way round Europe and got to England. I mean, it's extraordinary, quite extraordinary. He can be very contemptuous of Kevin. Mind you, Kevin also interrupts him. I mean, it's quite a combative relationship, I think, which Robert wins. It's a very, very exhaustive process, making the pieces. It's Marc Coulier Creations, I think they're called, and they're an absolutely brilliant team who are complete, leaders in the field, really. And they make a mold of your face, then they sculpt Robert Maxwell's face, and then they, I believe, using 3D printing, though I haven't seen that, and then they make the pieces that can make your face more like Robert Maxwell's, which in my case is most of my face has to be covered with these separate pieces. Neck and chin, nose, forehead, a wig, the eyebrows, which are kind of fitted into the piece that's the forehead. It's just very, very painstaking. And then they do a system where they have to use, they sort of flick with brushes a lot of sort of stippling kind of makeup on you to give it the tone and the texture of skin, and it just takes a very, very long time. You just have to sort of give yourself up to that, really. I can't sleep during it. If there was a nice dentist's chair, maybe I could, I don't know. But there isn't. I don't sleep, but it's sort of, there's something strangely contemplative about it, really. And then when you look at yourself in the mirror, something I've kind of been used to before when I've done makeups in the theatre, it is exactly like you put on this mask and you have to sort of fill the mask up, if you like. It's a sort of thriller, a comedy thriller in a way, because some of it's quite farcical almost, about how do you get the thing out of Russia when it's still just about the USSR, but everything's chaos there, and everyone's there's lots of corruption there and people after money, and there's this one man who's made this thing that everyone wants because they could make a lot of money about it from it in the West, who's kind of an innocent, and I'd say that's what it's about. People, and will he get his reward in the end, I suppose.
Well, it meant quite a lot because I am of that age when those games came out and the whole kind of, Sega Nintendo wars and all that. And me and my brother were really into video games. So, I had the original Game Boy, and we had like, at one point it was my ambition to own every console that had ever been produced. But then we got burgled, and so it sort of it never happened. But so it meant a lot to me, to be honest, and had a lot, had a lot of emotional attachment to it, I suppose. Obviously, we've done extensive research on all the different countries that we visit, and sort of separating them out by sort of colours, really, and that worked through that with Dan, the production designer, particularly because before we even had a conversation about it, actually, we were pretty much on the same page in terms of colour ways and stuff. And also with John, it seemed like we had a sort of intrinsic shared vision, I guess, of what these colours and kind of who these characters were, pretty much. So, in London, it's kind of navies and greys as a sort of a very broad brushstroke, and then Russia, we're into more sort of sludgy colours, and a sort of lack of contrast, I suppose, between tones. And then when we're in Tokyo, we're very much in lighter colours and pastels, and just to lighten it up because we're in a different environment. And in America, we're quite colourful there, just to sort of differentiate the things and just get a different feeling as we're going through the film, sort of travel, I suppose, because there's a lot of travel in the film. I liked his costume because there wasn't, John's been very trusting, I think, of me, which has been amazing. And he's from Hungary, and my wife is half Hungarian, so I've sort of got an understanding of those people. And he's of a certain age, and it was just fun to sort of build the character into his costume, rather than just be like, well, it's a man wearing a suit, because he's like he basically just goes around being a businessman, and he's got way more character than that, which I'm really happy about. And the second one probably would be Robert Maxwell, I guess, because it's just amazing. I mean, what Mark Coulio and Jan have done with his makeup is just phenomenal, and terrifying as well, because when he first came out with it, and he's got Roger's voice coming out of Robert Maxwell's face, and I'm kind of like, everyone's like, what's happened? It's like really confusing. But his suits, I'm really happy with the way his suits have turned out, because it's quite a challenge to costume somebody of that size, and obviously he's wearing a lot of padding as well, so which was Mark Coulio, which was just fantastic. But the sort of within the time scale, and obviously under COVID conditions, I'm really happy with how he's turned out, and he's like he's obviously a very big character in the films.